As I mentioned before, the theme of forgiveness, or the importance of forgiving others, is extremely important. If we hold on to a grudge, if we hold on to anger, resentment, a desire for vengeance, we ourselves cannot be forgiven. So as our Lord says, the measure we use will be the measure that we get. And we see that in today's gospel parable. St. Peter comes to our Lord and says, how often should I forgive a brother or sister who sins against me? As many as 7 times? And he's saying, well, that's a lot. Should I forgive as many as that amount of times? 7 times? Imagine if somebody seriously offended you 7 times, and you forgave each time. That's really magnanimous. That's really generous. You're being very merciful. But our Lord says, no, not 7 times, but I tell you 77 times. And he's not saying we should keep track of how many times. He's saying you should always forgive. So there should be no limit to your forgiveness. Now, this parable is very significant because when we think of the actual amounts that was owed, so, the first slave, he owes his master 10,000 talents. 10,000 talents. And it's important that we understand what a talent is. So a talent was roughly the equivalent of 20 years of wages. Now, if you assume that a daily wage is, let's say, for people making minimum wage, let's just say it's around $100. $100 a daily wage. So it would take you 20 years to pay off just 1 talent. And that's if you didn't spend money on rent or groceries or anything else. In other words, if you gave your entire salary to paying off your debt, if it was just 1 talent, it would take you 20 years. But we're talking about 10,000 talents. That would take you 200,000 years. 200,000 years. You're not even going to live that long. You're not even going to come close. In other words, it's impossible to pay off. And you see, our offense against God is an infinite offense, one that we could never pay. But Christ has taken this penalty upon himself and paid in our stead. In other words, he sacrificed his life in our stead, so we have been forgiven. But so often we are like this slave who goes out, and our fellow slave owes us 100 denarii. What is 1 denarii? 1 denarii is a day's wage, $100. So 100 denarii, that's like 100 days' wages. It's like $10,000. So, imagine people making minimum wage, they could probably pay off $10,000. But as I mentioned, they have to pay their rent, they have to pay for their groceries. So it would take them quite a long time. But they could still pay it off. $10,000 seems reasonable. It seems doable. But this slave, he says, no. You got to pay me right now. And his fellow slave pleads with him, give me time, be patient. No. So he throws him and his family into prison until he pays everything. He had no mercy. And this is what we are like. When we don't forgive our brother or our sister when they offend against us, we are like this slave. Now, why is it that when someone offends us, we feel so outraged, we feel that justice has to be done, we want the person to make compensation immediately? And why is it that when it comes time for us to forgive others, we are so slow to forgive? So part of the reason is because of our sense of justice. We have this sense of justice. And when someone offends us, we feel that a great injustice has been done. And we feel it's such a great injustice that justice has to be made right away. Compensation has to be made right away. And you see, the reason for this, part of the reason for this is not just the recognition of the injustice, but because of self-love. So because of our self-love, our self-pity, we demand that justice be done right away. But when it comes to forgiving others, the problem is that we still have self-love and we lack love of our neighbor. In other words, why is it difficult to practice mercy? Because we can see the injustice for ourselves, but we can't see the terrible situation that that person is in. You know, they owe us 100 denarii, let's say, or 100 days' wages, and we can't, it's almost like we can't comprehend the difficult situation that they're in, the difficult predicament. We're not willing to be merciful. In other words, we lack love. So the reality is that we are all very good at self-love, a selfish kind of love, but we're not very good at loving our neighbor and understanding the plight that our neighbor is in. And our Lord is trying to make us understand this by means of this parable. So both of them were in a similar kind of situation. They both owed someone money, great amounts of money. Even $10,000 is a great amount of money. But you see, the master, he had compassion on the one that owed him 10,000 talents, but the slave had no compassion for his fellow slave. So, you know, what we suffer, other people suffer. Like the way that I think is the way that other people think in many ways. And because I sin, I should be compassionate with others who also sin. And especially when they sin against me. I need to be willing to understand, okay, maybe they had a bad day, maybe they were just, you know, overwhelmed with work, and so they were a little bit impatient, they blew their top, and they said something that was rude or nasty, and that's why I got offended, or that's why they offended me. But I should be understanding. I should be willing to forgive. So we need to grow in love of neighbor. If we want to be able to practice mercy, to be able to forgive others, then we need to understand that, first of all, we have been forgiven an amount that we can never pay off. And so we ought to be generous in forgiving others, and loving them can help us to do that.